Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Sprague, and my presentation is on web services security. Specifically, I'm interested in RESTful web services development, API development, using an application server, in my case, the Wildfly application server, which is a Java-based application server. Today I'll be going over my architecture, the configuration of the application server, and then a way to securely store and access your data sources in such a way that it is maintained in one place and it's not installed separately on 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 separate applications. And then I'll have a summary at the end. So this is a very basic version of my architecture. You see we have a client who is trying to retrieve a web page from a web server. The web server is getting its data through an application server as opposed to interfacing directly with the database. The reason, obviously, this setup is so beneficial is because of the speed at which an application server can process, or I should say, do operations on the data retrieved by the database server, essentially. So the benefit to this type of setup is speed. So if you can imagine, you have a web application that is being accessed by thousands of clients. Performance is going to be a key factor in how you design your architecture. And so that's why I chose this specific type of architecture, because it's very popular in industry. And one other thing I should point out is it's connected to one database server. In reality, the application server could be communicating with as many database servers, multiple database servers. And then, of course, the question in this picture, should this exist? It's asking if the link between the web server and the database server should exist if you have an application server installed. And my opinion is probably it should not exist, but in reality, there's no way you're ever going to take that connection away. There's just many times where a web server does indeed need to communicate directly with the database server without going through the application server first. And I won't go into too many of those, but you could probably think of a situation where you had multiple application servers, or your web server had to interface between one or more application servers, and you have a function such as user credentials, and the web server for that data needs to interface directly. So should it exist? Probably not, but it most likely does, and I don't think that's going to change. Okay, benefits to this type of architecture, going over this a little more. Security, you can keep your database connections limited to mostly just the application server. Huge draw of this is because it's open source and it's portable. That's probably the biggest benefit to using this type of architecture, the portability. What I'm saying portable, I mean you can literally be on nothing but SQL Server databases today, and by developing using an application server and probably like a Spring.io type library of developing APIs under that library, you can literally take your MySQL, or excuse me, your SQL Server databases and move them over to whatever you really want. Because what ends up happening is the um, the Spring, if that's the library you're using for your APIs, actually maintains the database drivers separately, and you're not specifically writing queries to databases. The way you develop in Spring specifically is uh, more of creating an object inside of your Java environment that represents the actual database table. Um, and you can literally, if you build it in the correct way, you can literally say today we're on a SQL server, and tomorrow make the switch and you're on Maria or MySQL or Oracle or whatever. That's the huge benefit because there's so many options for databases right now, and companies are wanting to use all of them that are free, they're open source, and a lot of them have some of the same features as the Microsoft products and the Oracle product. It's that's where the biggest draw is the portability, and that's what you can get with this type of architecture. First thing you'll come to when you install your instance of Wildfly, you're going to need to go into your standalone XML configuration file, and you need to set up a lot of things in there in order to get a actual secure version of your server up and running. These other config files are available. The standalone full gives some additional options for threading and some stuff that we're not going to go over today. Standalone HA and full HA both provide clustering. So if you have an environment where maybe your developers write all their code on a test server, and then when it moves to production, it goes on a clustered instance. So a lot of times your test server will be standalone, and then your production environment will be clustered. So in that case, you would be looking at those two files. What I'm interested in for this experiment is just the standalone XML configs, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So one of the first things you'll see in the standalone.xml file is all these extensions. And the idea behind extensions in Wildfly is that Wildfly is a base product, a base server. It doesn't really have much functionality. All the usefulness that you're going to need as you're developing and building your server is going to be by using these extensions, these modules. That's where the actual functionality comes into place. And this structure has a lot of benefits. You keep that functionality uncoupled, and you can add or remove the things you don't add things you need, remove things you don't need. It's very customizable in that way. What you're looking at here is the initial version of Wildfly when you first download and install it. Okay. Next thing I'll point out, in the standalone XML file, you'll notice you'll have paths, which are very useful tools for accessing resources that you don't necessarily know the exact file path to. So you can set that up, and you can you create a logical name, and it's you can make your own paths, and you can also use system generated paths that Wildfly produces for you. And those are some examples there. Next thing you come to in standalone.xml is your management interfaces. This is where you're going to navigate to in your URL in order to access the Wildfly management console. This is where you would add new data sources or new users, passwords, other type of variables. Lots of things you can do from this location. But this is where you set up which port will be listening for the management interface, and in this case it's 9990. You also see that in the same places where you will set up your ports for HTTP, HTTPS, and a few others there. Excuse me. This is what you This is a screenshot of me navigating to the management console on a default install of Wildfly. So in this case, there is no users set up, so you do end up getting this error message, but it tells you that Wildfly is up and running on your local host. Okay, your logging services are going to be added to your project. This is, if you've worked in Java, you've probably worked with Log4j for debug. Um, that's exactly how it works here. You set it up. You can either import your library directly or through Maven, and then you can use the Log4j for debug output, error output, server errors, um, all that stuff. So you find that. And there's a couple others there. Okay, here is a example of the JBoss Developer Studio with a instance of Wildfly up and running. You can see here that's my standalone XML file. You see some of the same code we were just looking at, the ports that we set for the management interface as HTTP ports. And then you can see at the bottom in the console output, you can see that the server is up and running, and you can see where it's listening for on that admin console on port 9990. Okay, the idea behind setting up your data sources, as I was saying earlier, is essentially you want to have your data sources in one place, because if you have 100 applications, let's say, and they're all using the same username and password, well, that username and password changes or the password expires. Now you have 100 places you have to go to manage that. So it becomes unmaintainable is what it does. So you set your data sources up on the server. You add them either through the admin console or through your config.xml. And then this is how you actually access them in Java. So in your project, you can see you have this lookup method that comes from the context class. And what we're looking for is we're looking for a data source named MySQL data source. And then one more place down here, you have to also add the module in module.xml for your MySQL drivers. And this is where you would also add anything, your drivers for SQL Server and Maria, Cassandra, whatever database you're wanting to set up. You would put it in the module.xml. But then similarly, you would do the lookup like you're doing with this, but it would obviously be Java : my Cassandra database or my Maria database, whatever you have. Here's where I add the local data source in the standalone.xml file. And like I was saying before, this is typically done in the test environment or in the environment you set up on your local machine. When you deploy this to a server, whether test or production, you generally use the console to do any administrative tasks like adding passwords. But this is where it would end up inserting your new data source if you were to go to the console and add it through there. So that is my finished presentation. I hope you guys have enjoyed. This is basically, here's my summary. My answer to the homework question, the reading questions. Basically, the paper that I chose to study and use for this presentation was on exactly that, setting up a secure environment for Wildfly, and so I was able to use that paper and begin developing my own setup here on my machine, and I plan to go the next step in my final project, which will be actually developing my own RESTful web service. I'm going to develop an API, and well, I'm going to develop several APIs actually, but I'm going to use different techniques of the Spring.io library, and I'm going to try some that aren't secure, and I'm going to try some that are secure. So, and I'm going to run them. I'm going to run that on this instance of Wildfly that I've been working on getting set up. So, anyways, thanks.